On September 16th, 2025, 250 Somali pirates launched an assault on a US Navy fuel vessel, only to be met with America's unrestrained power. In the scorching waters near Somalia's coastline, 30 speedboats filled with armed men surged toward the USNS Guadeloupe, a Navy fleet oiler discreetly transporting more than 8 million gallons of fuel to support a nearby carrier strike group. From the decks of their boats, the raiders unleashed RPG-7 rockets, AK-47 fire, and bursts from DSHK heavy machine guns, their traces streaking across the night sky. Within minutes, they were dangerously close. But their calculations were flawed. They had overlooked the significance of the American flag fluttering above the tanker. The retaliation that followed was deafening. 3 CH-47 Chinook helicopters thundered in low, each carrying 120 Navy SEALs, armed with night vision optics, laser-guided rifles, and demolition gear. Overhead, 3 AH-64E Apache gunships circled with 30mm cannons ready, each loaded with 1,200 rounds, backed by an MQ-9 Reaper drone feeding live intelligence. Their collective mission was singular: destroy the pirate stronghold. The United States hadn't come to compromise. It came wielding fire, steel, and fury. Because once you threaten a ship bearing the US ensign, you're not confronting mere sailors. You're squaring off against the entirety of American military might. 3:30 hours, September 16th, 2025. The Gulf of Aden, 120 nautical miles northeast of Somalia's Isle. A shroud of darkness still hung over the waters when a chilling signature appeared on the radar of the USS Laboon, escorting the tanker on its route. At first glance, weary watchstanders assumed it was just clustered fishing vessels. But moments later, the truth surfaced. 30 speedboats charging forward, each crammed with armed fighters. Altogether, over 250 Somali pirates zeroed in on a single target. The target was the USNS Guadeloupe, hauling more than 8.2 million, enough to sustain an entire carrier strike group for weeks. This was not some spontaneous raid. Intelligence soon confirmed it was orchestrated by Khalid Qadar Abdul Rahman, a ruthless Somali warlord who had carved out a bloody empire along the ungoverned coastline. His forces weren't mere fishermen with rifles. They were organized, trained, and equipped with AK-47s, RPG-7s, and .50 caliber machine guns bolted to their bows. For the first time in nearly 20 years, the US Navy confronted not ragtag bandits, but a paramilitary threat on the open sea. Aboard the Laboon, Captain Michael Harris and his crew of 290 understood the stakes instantly. If the tanker was breached, the detonation could rival 30,000 pounds of TNT, an inferno visible for miles. The Gulf of Aden, one of the busiest trade arteries in the world, would be plunged into chaos. As the flotilla advanced, crimson alarms lit up Laboon's combat deck. Sirens wailed. The command crackled over the radios. All hands, prepare for battle. Everyone knew this was no routine watch. It was the opening round of a fight that would measure the Navy's resilience against overwhelming numbers. The first exchange was only moments away. Would the sailors of the United States hold their ground? Or would the pirates carve their name into infamy with the unthinkable? 4:20 hours, engines screaming at nearly 40 knots, the pirate flotilla descended upon the USNS Guadeloupe. From the bridge of the USS Laboon, Captain Harris stared into the nightmare as it unfolded before his eyes. Wave after wave of skiffs carved through the inky sea. They surged like an angry hive, sparks stabbing into the sky. The opening strike came without warning. An RPG slammed into the tanker's aft superstructure, tearing through steel and igniting a small blaze. Astonishingly, the onboard fire crews doused the flames within minutes, yet the warning was unmistakable. A single error could set ablaze more than 8.2 million gallons of JP5 jet fuel. It would rival the largest non-nuclear detonations at sea, capable of incinerating half the Gulf of Aden. Pirates attacked in successive swarms, unleashing AK-47s, PKMs, and 12.7mm DSHK mounts fixed to their skiffs. Tracer fire lit the darkness while rockets screamed overhead. One projectile missed the lagoon's bridge by a scant 8 feet, blowing out a window and wounding 4 sailors with glass and shrapnel. Another tore through the deck, leaving 2 gunners badly burned, but still manning their stations. The US Navy replied with merciless accuracy. Laboon's 50 caliber machine guns thundered, shredding wooden craft in seconds. Gunners aboard the cruiser USS Cape St. George, having answered Laboon's distress call from 5 nautical miles away and entering the melee from the south, added 20mm cannon bursts, expending nearly 4,500 rounds in the opening 10 minutes. Within 30 minutes, 9 pirate skiffs lay ruined. Boards and bodies were flung into the sea. A blast ripped fuel tanks aboard one skiff, killing at least 15 pirates instantly. Still, the attackers pressed on with reckless determination. Around 21 skiffs kept coming, aiming to ram the tanker and force a boarding to take hostages. They failed to reach their objective. A volley of .50 caliber rounds cleaved a vessel in 2, sending wreckage and bodies into the swell. Another skiff fired a second RPG roughly 200 yards from Laboon's pier. It detonated harmlessly in the water. The concussion shook windows and knocked sailors from their feet. By dawn, the sea was strewn with charred hulks and oil sheen. At least 70 pirates were dead. Despite being outnumbered roughly 10-1, the US warships held. Yet the ferocity of the assault exposed a grim reality. This was not ordinary piracy, it was naval warfare. As sunlight climbed, more skiffs raced toward the fight. The engagement had only begun. Would the forthcoming assault obliterate the pirates' stronghold or stumble into a lethal ambush? At 5:10, smoke from burning craft still hung over the Gulf of Aden, but peril remained. The captain braced for more than 180 pirates still afloat, regrouping into fresh waves. Ammunition cascaded into the sea at a dizzying pace. By then, the pirates had unleashed over 70,000 rounds in under an hour. Yet, wounded as they were, American sailors calmly rose and kept firing at the surviving skiffs. They could not react and were immediately trapped aboard their boats. Captain Michael Harris of the Laboon realized brute force alone would not break the swarm. He called for reinforcements. At Camp Lemonnier, Djibouti, the only permanent US base in Africa, some 800 miles away, the alarms sounded. Within minutes, orders were dispatched. Launch MQ-9 Reapers for live surveillance, send helicopters, and ready a SEAL contingent for a land counterstrike. The crews tightened their straps and checked weapon feeds. Medics prepared triage stations. Instantly, 3 CH-47 Chinook helicopters, flanked by 3 AH-64E Apache gunships armed with 30mm cannons and Hellfire missiles, were redirected for the mission. SEAL teams assembled breaching charges, thermal optics, and suppressed carbines. Out at sea, the USS Cape St. George maneuvered into position to shield the tanker while the Laboon replenished ammunition in anticipation of the next assault. Drone surveillance soon confirmed the worst. Along Somalia's Bawe coastline, analysts pinpointed a heavily fortified pirate stronghold. Warehouses crammed with stolen cargo, motorized boats, and a staggering cache of more than 15 tons of munitions and fuel. The ringleader was no mystery. Khalid Qadar Abdrahman, who had laundered over $40 million in ransom payments into illicit arms, including Russian-supplied RPGs and Chinese heavy weapons, stood behind the network. His operation had transformed coastal hamlets into launchpads for large-scale raids on international shipping. The directive was unmistakable. Secure the waters, then dismantle the source. America's strategy shifted from defense to offense. The Navy was no longer reacting. They were preparing to bring the fight ashore. The looming strike promised to eclipse the ferocity of the sea battle. But what would unfold when U.S. Special Operations Forces set foot on Somali soil? At 0800 hours, the first streaks of sunlight broke across the Barawi coast, where sand met jungle and concealed the nerve center of Abdrahman's empire. Intelligence estimated over 150 armed fighters guarded the compound, backed by 15 tons of armaments, 200 RPGs, and tens of thousands of rounds. On shore, dozens of skiffs sat fueled and ready for another maritime wave. The assault began. 3 CH-47 Chinooks thundered low across the surf, each carrying 120 SEALs, deploying them into ambush sites. Above them, 3 AH-64E Apaches circled menacingly, their 30mm cannons loaded with 1,200 shells each, waiting for the signal. From offshore, the USS Laboon unleashed precise 5-inch naval gunfire, striking a fuel depot on the compound's edge marked earlier by reconnaissance. The blast was catastrophic. 40,000 gallons of diesel erupted in a towering fireball, shaking the coast as though from an earthquake. The SEALS surged forward. Within moments, the first warehouse was breached. Inside were stockpiles of Chinese-made rifles and Iranian mortars, hard evidence of a clandestine supply chain arming Somali warlords. In another building, 6 hostages, including 2 American merchant mariners, were freed, their chains cut away. The pirates fought back savagely. RPGs screamed overhead, one detonating just 20 meters from the forward SEAL squad, scattering shrapnel across the sand. A truck-mounted DSHK heavy machine gun spewed 600 rounds per minute, pinning the team until an Apache loosed Hellfire missiles, obliterating the position in a concussive strike. Boats and vehicles were incinerated in succession. By 8:45, the tide had turned. SEAL demolition teams had planted charges across the weapons depot. Within minutes, secondary explosions consumed the compound, flattening entire structures. Overhead, Apaches strafed retreating fighters, severing escape routes, while Chinooks readied for extraction. In under 60 minutes, more than 90 pirates were dead, 60 captured, and the fortress itself reduced to rubble. Plumes of smoke towered above the coast, visible for miles across the Gulf of Aden. The message carried no ambiguity. The U.S. Navy was not simply safeguarding its ships, it was dismantling piracy at its very roots. And yet, as the SEALS lifted off, one haunting question lingered. What came next? Who was truly pulling the strings behind Qadar's arsenal? By 1630, the Gulf of Aden felt eerily quiet. Smoke still hovered above the swells, but the result was unmistakable. The largest pirate onslaught in living memory, 250 men in 30 skiffs, had been routed, shattering the empire of Khalid Qadar Abdrahman. The figures tell a brutal tale. More than 180 pirates were killed, and 70 were either wounded or taken prisoner. Nearly 80 others were rounded up, shackled, and transferred to detention facilities run by the United States and its partners. Controlled detonations erased at least a dozen warehouses that held some 15 tons of ordnance, 200 RPG launchers, 2 million rounds of ammunition, and 40,000 gallons of fuel.